The castle balcony of Shattenhall jutted into the autumn air, cold and sharp with November frost. Maleficent stood at its edge, black robes trailing like smoke, her bandaged arm hidden beneath the folds. The green in her eyes caught the moonlight as she gazed over the valley. Below, the Reich moved with mechanical rhythm. Convoys of trucks snarled along the roads, headlights cutting pale lines across the dark. Tanks rumbled through the fields where orchards once grew, their engines drowning the crickets. Far above, the low drone of planes pulsed steady, carrying war farther than any dragon could fly. Maleficent's lips curled faintly. Once these valleys belonged to kings. Their banners lit the night. Now, she gestured toward the headlights, the steel, the engines. Rats and iron shells scurry where fey creatures once played. Ryder stood a pace behind her, hands clasped behind his back, his coat stiff in the wind. "The rats," he said calmly, "have unseated every throne. The Habsburgs, the Romanovs, the Kaiser. 1,000 years of crowns swept away in a single war. The peasant is king now. Or worse, he serves no king at all." Ryder stepped closer, his voice steady against the drone of engines. "A nation with no crown, no prince. A throne of paper and law. There no one bows, not even to you. That is what you flew into." For a moment she was silent, her jaw clenched. A squadron of planes roared overhead, their shadows sweeping across the balcony stones. At last she spoke, voice low and bitter. "Then the world is lost." Ryder shook his head. "Not lost, changed. And that is why we need each other." Her gaze cut toward him, sharp, searching. "You are power. The kind peasant cannot build with factories and wires. You are fear, myth, all made flesh. We are resources, armies, machines that shield you until you rise again. Together, we remind the world that some forces cannot be reduced to paper or votes." She turned back to the valley, lips pressed thin. The headlights crawled like ants below. "And if I refuse?" His voice was calm as ever. "Then you remain here, diminished, while the world forgets you again. But if you accept, we are the only stage left worthy of your fire. And you are clever enough to see that." Maleficent exhaled slowly, frost blooming in the night air. At last her lips curved, faint and sharp. "Perhaps, little doctor, you are right. Perhaps the world needs reminding." The doors to the intelligence chamber opened with a groan of iron hinges. Ryder entered first, stiff as a cadet on inspection, and behind him came Maleficent. She swept in as though she belonged, her cloak dark as oil, horns catching the lamplight. The sudden hush that fell across the room had nothing to do with discipline. Himmler rose from his chair at the head of the table. His face was a mask, but his pale eyes flicked briefly to Ryder. "I had asked for this staff," he said, each word clipped. "Instead, you return with its mistress." Ryder bowed his head. "Sir, may I present Her Formidable Majesty, Maleficent, the Dark Fay. She is willing to offer aid to our endeavors, with the promise that we aid in restoring her ancient kingdom." Maleficent said nothing. She let the silence stand. Himmler's eyes shot daggers at Ryder. After a beat, Himmler extended a hand. "You are a guest of the Reich." The words were courteous, but his tone left little doubt how unexpected her presence was. "You may address me as Reichsführer Himmler." They led her slowly through the chamber. Maps stretched across the walls, bristling with pins and strings. Telephones crackled on side desks where clerks relayed reports. An and Erber occultists whispered as they tended the mirrors. Their surfaces rippled with brief images of their enemies. Officers moved with the self-importance of men too busy to admit how rattled they were. Himmler described the workings of the SS and their ambitions of world dominion. He explained how their operations functioned, How they've been giving the Allies a good thrashing on all fronts. Maleficent paused by the speaking mirror, her eyes lingering on the shimmer. She inclined her head. These are worthy. An achievement indeed to have two in one room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, some emboldened, others unsettled. One of them cleared his throat and stepped forward, eager to impress. "South-Seas course," he said quickly. "We have been preparing it for over a year, ration-seeded with the herbs, patiently saturating our enemies across multiple continents. All that remains is the chant. Can you do it?" Dozens of eyes fixed on her, hungry. "Yes," Maleficent said, her voice calm, unhurried. The chamber erupted into excited chatter. Plans for entire battalions cursed the world over, Allied armies shattered, sweeping devastation that would turn the tide of the war. Their voices overlapped, greedy, fever-bright. Maleficent lifted her hand. The room stilled. "Large curses cannot be stacked," she said coldly. "They must run their course. One tide must ebb before another may rise. Between them, you will have to rely on nudges." The officers frowned, muttering the unfamiliar term. "Nudges?" Her lips curved faintly. "Not storms, but breezes. Not avalanches, but pebbles. A curse bends fate in sweeping arcs, but nudges turn the wheel by inches. A mislaid ration, a convoy delayed, a general tripping on his own stairs. Subtle hands shaping the outcome until the next great curse may fall." They fell into an uneasy silence. Their visions of grandeur shrank to something smaller, but their eyes betrayed a dawning respect. At the head of the table, Himmler's irritation had cooled to calculation. His voice was quiet, thin as a blade. "Explain, then, these nudges." Maleficent inclined her head. It was not obedience. It was permission. The officers convened. The chamber was crowded with the Reich's highest men, generals, party officials, and SS commanders, seated beneath banners heavy with smoke. Ryder sat at his usual place, at the large table. Once all the relevant officers were gathered, Maleficent rose from her chair, tall and terrible. She moved with the unhurried poise of a professor about to begin a lecture. When she spoke, her voice slid through the chamber like velvet on a blade. "You clamor for miracles," she began, eyes glinting. "Storms, plagues, curses to shatter armies. But understand this first. Every act of fairy magic has a cost. The world does not bend without striking back. That recoil, what you might call a whiplash effect, it can affect events for the one casting the spell, and cascade to untold consequences around them." The council shifted uneasily. "Fairy law strives to balance between devastating force and nudges," Maleficent continued. "It is leverage, a seed that grows into a forest, a whisper that grows into thunder. That is how kingdoms fall, not by hammering, but by the smallest nudge at the right stone." Her smile was slight, dangerous. "Remember this well. To wield such power carelessly is to court your own destruction. To wield it wisely is to have dominion, to have control over destiny." She let the silence linger, her gaze passing over the assembly, before settling at last on Ryder. He inclined his head, composed as always. After digesting Maleficent's lecture, officers leaned over the paper landscape, no longer barking demands for miracles, but speaking in careful, deliberate tones. Maleficent reclined at the head of the chamber like a dark tutor, eyes half-lidded, listening as her students wrestled with her doctrine. "Italy bleeds us most," Kaltenbrunner said, tapping the line with a finger stained by tobacco. "The Allies batter it day after day. To fortify every trench would shatter the bearer. But a single citadel, enchanted stone that refuses to crumble, might hold them in place for months." Murmurs of approval circled the table. Maleficent inclined her head. That is a nudge. Across the map, Jodel drew his pencil across the channel. We cannot sink the fleet, but fogs, storms, saddle delays. Enough for timetables to slip, for tempers to fray. The invasion may collapse beneath its own weight. The Ribbentrop smirked thinly. Imagine Eisenhower waking each dawn to another cancelled embarkation. Even the English will lose heart. The East, Muller pressed, voice low. The Red Army swarms. We cannot halt them outright, but curse one crossing. The Dnieper, perhaps. Flood it, stall their tanks. And the Americans, Himmler said at last, eyes fixed on Ryder. The atomic project. Too far for us to reach, but perhaps not beyond the sorceress. Ryder steepled his fingers, his voice calm. Not the laboratories. That would expose us. Instead, a single scientist. Fatigue, confusion, a faltering hand. One wrong calculation. The project limps for years. The council sat in hushed agreement. It was now a council of nudges. Men who once demanded thunderbolts now whispered about delays, missteps, single threads to unravel the tapestry. Maleficent's green irises glittered with approval. At last, she said, her smile slow and cruel. You begin to think like fairies. The same frescoed chamber in Naples was stale with cigarette smoke and chill from the November air. Aides scurried at the edges with folders, but the center of the table was bare save for a pigeon crate and a small stick laid neatly beside it. Major General Ellery slapped his palm down, already scowling. You call this assembly for a bird? Major Ellison stood stiff at John's side. Not just a bird, sir. It made repeated flights at my captain's squad, and it carried this. He tapped the wand-shaped stick. Brigadier Godfrey leaned forward, frowning. Looks like kindling. John swallowed, then spoke for the first time, voice muffled in his leather mask, but firm. Not firewood, sir. It's a signal. I believe the prisoner who sent it meant to show us a wand, and the pigeon spoke a word. Repeated it often enough, I can't dismiss it. Weatherford, the intelligence colonel, gave a derisive snort. Spoke? Pigeons coo, Captain. John didn't blink. This one cooed a word. Colditz. The name broke the rhythm of the room. Godfrey's eyes flicked sideways. Weatherford's pen stopped scratching. Even Ellery hesitated, his scowl faltering for a moment. The medical officer, Kessler, crossed his arms tighter. Colditz? The POW castle? Yes, sir, Ellison said quickly. It matches reports of unusual SS traffic through Saxony. Not the usual prisoner movements, something more. Weatherford cleared his throat, reluctant. We've had rumors, intercepts about special detainees, but Colditz is deep in Germany. You don't just stroll up with a squad of sappers and cut her loose. If there's really something there. Ellery snapped the folder shut. Exactly. Waste of breath. Even if we believe the story, we lack reach. John stepped forward before he could stop himself. Sir, whoever's there, they want out. And if they are who I think, they may explain why the enemy strikes us as if they can see our orders before we write them. That silenced even Ellery. Godfrey leaned back slowly, weighing the thought. John drew a breath. I get that our raid's impossible. We can't get to her, but maybe we can help her reach us. The SS believed my body could recharge her wand. They were right. That means even a fragment of me may carry the same charge, small enough for the pigeon to carry. If this person is as powerful as I heard discussed among the SS, she can summon the strength to escape. Weatherford leaned back, skeptical. Even if this prisoner slips the walls, where do they run? We can't have agents lingering on riverbanks for weeks waiting for a witch, as your intel suggested, to stroll out of a castle. Ellison stepped in. Then we make it bounded. One landmark, river. She'll know which one. And a time, midnight. We'll tell our contacts to patrol the Mulde for a set span, no more than a week. Kessler muttered. And how is she supposed to know when the week begins? John's answer was quiet. The day the pigeon arrives. Godfrey nodded slowly. 3 days for the bird to travel, then 7 nights. Our men arrive on the 10th day. Hold midnight, watch through the 17th. If she makes it, she's ours." Ellery grunted. "At least it's finite. Minimal resources. Lowest possible risk." "Do we have your permission, sirs? Would you activate the contact for the rescue?" Ellery's pursed scowl lingered a long moment before he leaned forward and pulled out his pad. "Yes, we'll activate our contacts. 10 days from today. They will watch for your prisoner." John couldn't help but smile, and then unbuttoned his shirt so he could reach inside. From beneath his fatigues, he worked loose a splinter of his own body, a shard already cracked from a bullet gouge. He held it up, pale wood faintly gleaming in the lamplight. Ellison carved 3 words into the smooth side of the splinter with a pocket knife. "River, 7 nights, midnight." John opened the cage and offered his hand to the pigeon. Unlike the usual messenger pigeons used by the military, it didn't need to be seized. It politely stepped onto John's hand. John handed the sliver to the bird. "This is important. Don't lose it. Make sure it gets back to the person who sent you. Thank you, little one, and Godspeed." The bird only blinked at him, head cocked, then took the splinter, only 2 inches long in its talons. Everyone curiously followed as John walked the pigeon out of doors and held it aloft. The pigeon took flight and banked north. For a long moment no one moved. Then Ellery exhaled and muttered, "Heaven help us, we're pinning hopes on a danged pigeon." "The pigeon Cherami didn't let us down in the Great War," John pointed out. Ellison reluctantly agreed. "I'll send her my regards when next I visit her stuffed carcass in the Smithsonian," Ellery noted sarcastically. At Oak Ridge, the night shift had settled into its rhythm. Steam hissed through pipes, the din of machinery muffled only by the clatter of typewriters. One of the engineers leaned back from his panel, rubbing his temples for what felt like the 10th time in as many hours. The numbers blurred together. His fatigue was a weight pressing down on every calculation. A sharp hiss drew his attention. A pipe along the wall bulged, then burst, spraying boiling water in a fine mist. Shouts rose, men rushed to cut valves, notebooks and slide rules abandoned in a puddle of scalding steam. The chain of work staggered, momentum broken. In another location, a fatigue-stricken physicist stared at his chalkboard. A single correction he should have made days ago eluded him, slipped again through his fingers. He pressed his palms to his eyes, muttering, "Just can't think." Miles away across the ocean, the disturbance had already been written. In the Wewelsburg intelligence chamber, Maleficent stood before the beast-seeing mirror. The orb of her staff pulsed faintly, casting green light across the stone interior. The image of the American facility swam across the glass, a scatter of men scurrying through the steam, the chalkboard smudged by a tired hand. Her expression was unreadable. She did not conjure storms or fire. She whispered only a word, the faintest breath. The mirror shimmered, and the pulse of her staff subsided. The work at Oak Ridge would continue, yes, but slower, heavier, less certain. That was enough. Maleficent turned from the mirror, her cloak sweeping behind her, the officers whispering eagerly in her wake. These were not storms, but breezes, not avalanches, but pebbles, and the pebbles had begun to fall. Grey light pooled over Colditz Castle, its towers cutting sharp against a misted Saxon sky. The Mulda River gleamed faint below, indifferent to the fortress perched on its bluff. Sentinels paced the walls, rifles on their shoulders, boots scuffing on ancient stone. No one noticed the pigeon. It wheeled once, then alighted on a parapet, feathers ruffled from a long flight. It cooed insistently, head bobbing. To the guards it was nothing, another bird on another day. From barred windows below, prisoners leaned out, watching. One tapped his comrade's shoulder. "Isn't it late in the year for mating calls?" Another muttered, "Forget the bird. The tunnel's nearly ready. Shut up before they hear." The conversation faded into the corridor. From a crack in the wall, a small shape emerged. A mouse, whiskers twitching. It crept onto the parapet where the pigeon had set down its burden. The sliver of pale wood gleamed in the weak light. The pigeon cooed once more, sharp, insistent, then pattered aside. The mouse seized the fragment in its teeth and vanished into the stonework. Down stairwells, along beams, across chill floors it scurried. Prisoners whispered plans in their cells. "The glider in the attic. Rope sewn from sheets." But none noticed the tiny couriers slipping past their bars. Deeper it went until the air grew damp and the torches fewer, and to the cellar vaults where no barred windows gave light. There it stopped before a heavy door, a crack wide enough for whiskers, then shoulders, then tail, and the mouse wiggled through. Inside, the matrone stirred. Her shroud was coarse wool, her body thin, hair matted. Chains rattled as she shifted, blinking in the dark. The mouse dropped the splinter onto her lap. She reached for it slowly, uncertain, fingers brushing its grain. At once it warmed against her palm. Faint light spread, soft and blue, spilling across the stones. Her breath caught. Scratched into the wood were words, rough but legible, illuminated from within. River, 7 days, midnight. She stared, the glow reflected in her tired eyes. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "Midnight," she murmured, voice hoarse but touched with irony. "Always midnight with me, isn't it?" The glow steadied, brightening the cell. For the first time since her capture, the fairy godmother held a sliver of hope. The cell was stone and shadow, its damp air pressing like a tomb. For 7 nights she had waited, turning the little wooden splinter over in her hands until its glow had dimmed to the faintest ember. Tonight it pulsed faintly again, as though listening. Chains rattled when she shifted. Her wrists were raw where the iron burned unceasingly. She drew a breath, steady and soft. Now. The splinter warmed in her palm, magic surging into the manacles. At once, the manacles flaked with orange rust, as if centuries had passed in a heartbeat. Links fell away with a soft clatter. The shackles at her ankles split open the same way, metal dull and brittle. She rose slowly, unsteadily on her feet. The cell door loomed, bars slick with condensation. She pressed the splinter to the lock. For a moment nothing happened. Then the bolt sighed back of its own accord. The door creaked open. She stepped into the corridor. Boots echoed above. A patrol descended the stairwell. 2 guards with rifles slung, their voices carrying in clipped German. She froze in the shadows, breath shallow. The bulbs on the wall flickered, guttered, then went out entirely. In the sudden dark, the guards cursed, fumbling for flashlights. They passed within an arm's reach and did not see her. The splinter's glow was weaker now, but still alive, just like her beaten and starved body. Up another stair, into a corridor lined with doors. Prisoners' voices whispered through the cracks, scraps of schemes and plans. "The sheets tied together will hold, I swear. The glider, nearly finished. By spring will fly clear over the river." They fell silent at the sound of her step, assuming it a guard. She moved on, unseen. At the end of the passage stood a heavy barred door. She pressed the splinter to the lock. The tumblers clicked like a sigh of resignation, and the iron gave way. Cold night air breathed in. The splinter in her hand was dark now, its glow gone. No more help, only her wits. Beyond lay the courtyard. Searchlights swept the cobbles. Guards smoked by the gatehouse. A dog strained at its chain, nose lifting. She locked eyes with it and whispered. The dog watched, but remained silent. She slipped into the shadows along the wall, heart hammering. At the far side she found what the mouse had been telling her about. A length of rope, frayed but knotted, hidden in a recess of stone. POW handiwork, abandoned or waiting. She took hold, breast shallow, and climbed. Her body ached, hands raw, but she forced herself over the parapet. The night opened into the valley. Far below, the mulda whispered. She lowered herself down the rope, slipping once, catching her grip with a gasp. Her bandaged hands and feet screaming. At last she dropped to the slope, knees buckling, rolling in the wet grass. She staggered toward the river, every step a battle. The forest pressed close, the water gleaming faint under moonlight. At the bank she collapsed, clutching the dead splinter in her hand. From the reeds came a whisper. "Fräulein?" 2 figures emerged, peasant coats over partisan armbands. Their lantern light fell on her face, gaunt and hollow-eyed. Her hand opened at last, the splinter, her key to freedom, magic spent. She smiled faintly, breathless. "Midnight, as promised." And then she fainted into their arms. the river murmuring on as if nothing had happened. The signal came through to Naples just past midnight. Weatherford translated it himself, lips moving silently as the Morse ticked. When he finished, he read it again, as though the code had betrayed him. Finally, he croaked. "Asset acquired. En route. Stop." Silence blanketed the table. Even Ellery, usually volcanic, had nothing. Godfrey's glasses slipped down his nose as he leaned forward. "You can't mean—" Weatherford tapped the page. "Their phrasing is unambiguous. The witch has been extracted. Resistance claims she is alive." For the first time, Godfrey saw generals look like children caught in a story they'd mocked the night before. "They estimate 7 to 10 days to move her south by resistance chain. Faster if the RAF risk a lift. Either way, she's bound for Naples." Back at the front lines, the sun burned low over the valley, throwing long shadows across the cratered road. Engineers sweated under their helmets, prying twisted metal from the rubble of a blasted culvert. John worked silently, broad shoulders bent, goggles fogged with dust. Each swing of the pickaxe rang through the cut. From a group leaning on their shovels came a mutter loud enough to carry. "Careful, don't scuff his paint. That's government property." Snickers. Another voice. "Looks like March of the Wooden Soldiers came to life. Ease up, Charlie McCarthy, your jaw's flapping." "Think his sister is a Cupid doll?" Laughter rolled down the line. John's grip tightened on the pick, but he didn't look up. He drove the blade into the earth again, rock and dirt scattering. Ray straightened, eyes narrowing. "Funny thing," he said loud enough for them to hear. "Charlie McCarthy never lifted a rifle in his life. This one just saved yours a week ago." Nick stepped forward, quiet but deliberate, eyes flat. "Say it again," he told the nearest laughter. "Say it where he can hear you." The group fell suddenly busy, shovels biting the dirt. Their laughter thinned to mutters. John paused, leaning on his pick. Dust streaked his gloves as he wiped at the goggles. A few weeks ago, it would have cut deeper, but the daily loyalty of his squad had steadied him. Major Ellison appeared at the road's edge, conferring with a lieutenant over maps. His gaze cut toward the jeerers. "Back to it, all of you, and mind your tongues. Captain Zimmerman's earned more than your respect." The men bent instantly to work. Ellison turned back to his papers without another word, but the weight of his voice lingered. Engines growled from the ridge. 3 jeeps rolled down the cut, cleaner than any mud-caked convoy truck. Men in dark fatigues dismounted, broad-shouldered, hard-eyed. On their sleeves, black patches with yellow lettering. Rangers. They moved with brisk precision, boots snapping against stone. The nearest sergeant barked. "Which one is Zimmerman?" Work slowed. Heads turned. John set down the pickaxe, straightening, hand raised. "Here." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "Remove the mask." John hesitated. Nick shifted at his side. Slowly he removed his helmet. Goggles and hood came off. His wooden face caught the light. The rangers froze. A couple exchanged looks, half shocked, half sneering. One muttered, "Heaven almighty! They weren't kidding." Another shook his head, disgust curling his lip. "This is what they're giving us? A doll?" The jeerers snickered in validation. The sergeant didn't flinch. "Orders are orders. You're coming with us." "What's this about?" "You're being reassigned to our division. You're to receive special training. They want to see what you can do as an enhanced soldier." The ranger said the last part with skepticism. John swallowed once, then nodded. He faced Nick and Larry. Ray hurried to join them. "Keep your heads down. Watch out for each other. You'll do fine." His voice was steady. Ray's face cinched in pain, and he dropped his head. John laid a hand on his shoulder. "None of that, soldier." Ray kept his head down, sobs breaking free. John froze, then softened, and lifted his chin gently. "It's going to be all right." "I don't want you to go, sir." "A good soldier goes where he's needed," John whispered back. His own eyes stung. A ranger's bark cut across the road. "Mount up, Captain! Now!" Ray wiped at his eyes with a dirty sleeve, voice thick. "Come back to us when you can." "I'll find a way." John clasped hands with them one last time. Then he turned to Ellison, who stood by regretfully. John offered his hand. Ellison took it firmly. "I'll never forget what you did for me here," John said. "Nor I what you've done," Ellison returned, then leaned close. "Show these braggarts what you're made of. Put one in the dirt for me, will ya?" He winked. John smiled faintly and nodded. The Rangers closed in. They didn't offer a handshake or a word, only clipped commands as though crating up a piece of ordnance. John was ushered toward their jeep, flanked on both sides. Nick called after him, voice tight. "We'll see you again, Cap." John glanced back once, managed the smallest nod, then climbed into the jeep. The mask lay in his hands, straps limp, as the engine growled to life. The convoy pulled away with him boxed inside, dust rising in their wake. Behind, the engineers bent back to their shovels. Ray's shovels struck stone with a dull clang. He stood a moment, shoulders tight, before wiping his eyes again and swinging. The clang rang hollow. The road felt emptier without him. Cassino, an ancient hill town crowned by the Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino, the anchor of the German defense in Italy, the place where the entire front seemed to grind itself to pieces. At Cassino's foot, the infantry cursed their weapons. Rifles that had fired cleanly a week ago now jammed with every second shot. Springs broke, magazines refused to seat. A company's advance faltered not for lack of courage, but for the metallic cluster of jammed bolts. Convoys bound for Britain limped into port half empty. Engines seized mid-ocean. Fog lay thickest when U-boats prowled. A freighter carrying grain split its hull on a sandbar charted clear. Sailors muttered that Neptune himself had turned against them. Allied airdrops scattered like children's toys. Food fell into empty fields. Crates of ammunition smashed on rocks. In villages, desperate hands opened packages marked with the Cross of Lorraine, only to find them spoiled, mold creeping where none had been before. Couriers in Warsaw swore their maps betrayed them. Where for months the maps were reliable, suddenly the same maps were a confusing mess, nothing lining up where it ought to on the real battlefield. Resistance cells wandered in circles until they were caught. It wasn't always, only often enough to sap courage, to make men whisper of betrayal. Maleficent watched through the seeing mirror, the SS officers standing in silent awe as she worked. Their enemies scrambled, thwarted, defeated, and none the wiser that it was orchestrated and not merely bad luck. The Ranger convoy wound into a hidden valley, the peaks closing in like a fortress of stone. Camouflage nets sagged between pines, blotting out the sky. Beneath them sprawled a camp that didn't exist on any roster. Tents marked only by numbers, obstacle courses scarred into the dirt. Walls of ropes and timber in a mock village of shattered stone farmhouses, battered from training. Men moved everywhere, silent and precise. No laughter, no jeers. This was no infantry bivouac, it was a crucible. The jeeps halted before a warehouse draped in nets. John swung down, boots crunching gravel. He reached for his duffel, but the sergeant snapped. "Leave it." Dust still clung to his uniform. He felt small. In front of the warehouse, the committee waited, a line of officers and specialists, hard eyes, clipboards, notebooks. Their gaze swept him like searchlights. His face steeled, his brows low. A stir went through the line. Disbelief, unease, even revulsion. Major Ellsworth Penn scratched furiously on his clipboard. Dr. Hartman tilted his head, studying, his eyes seeing, head not quite believing. Captain Callahan gave a short, derisive laugh. Lieutenant Weiss muttered, "Looks like a gosh darn ventriloquist dummy." Colonel Harlan's eyes never blinked. "Weapon or spectacle? We'll find out." John stood taller despite the weight in his chest. Whatever else they thought, he would show them. Colonel Harlan stepped forward, tall and severe. "Captain Zimmerman, you've been seconded to this command. Effective immediately, you will submit to evaluation and instruction. You will address me as Colonel, them as Sir. You will do exactly as you are told. Understood? Shirt off, stripped to unders. You won't need comfort here." The cold mountain air hit his wooden arms as he stood in his undershirt and trousers. Soldiers who'd come out to watch stiffened at the sight, not gawking, but unsettled, as though they had been told a ghost story and found it standing before them. Colonel Harlan's voice carried across the camp. "Straight to the course. We'll see what we've been sent." They wanted to see his impossible body at work. John nodded once and strode to the starting rope. His duffel sat forgotten in the truck. The whistle shrilled. John exploded forward, over the first wall. His fingers bit deep grooves into the timber as he hauled himself over. He landed hard and kept moving, leaping trenches, clambering ropes hand over hand so fast the line groaned. Mud streaked his arms, but he barely slowed, shouldering through coils of barbed wire that scraped against his wooden carapace. By the end, his stride remained brisk, breath-steady. Silence lingered on the platform. Major Ellsworth adjusted his spectacles, scribbling. Not grace, not speed, more like raw force. He moves as if obstacles are nuisances, not barriers. Captain Callahan's voice was low. He's not an athlete, he's a ram. Dr. Hartman said nothing, only watched, his eyes intent, shifting uncomfortably. "Again," Harlan ordered. "Backwards." John turned without complaint and went again. After that, they marched him straight into the warehouse and stripped away every piece of fabric. His duffel sat unopened by the door. "Stand there," Hartman ordered, clipboard under his arm. His gaze ran down John's bare wooden frame. "I don't know what I expected, but there's nothing ordinary to see here." John stood rigid as Weiss rapped his knuckles against his chest. "Not oak. Grain's tighter. Pine, maybe, but denser grain." He leaned closer, pressing calloused fingers into the puckered rings of healing bullet holes, fascinated at the stages of repair. Ellsworth circled him slowly, voice precise. "Painted features, yet they track with expression. No cracking across the surface." He touched a finger to John's brow, rubbed at the paint, and frowned when it did not smudge, even with its fresh appearance. Hartman stepped closer, his tone quieter than the others. "Do you feel pain?" John's brows drew low, mouth set firm. "Enough." The room hushed, even Ellsworth's pencil stilled. At last Colonel Harlan folded his arms. "He's no trick, that much is certain. Whether he is a weapon, that remains to be seen." He glanced toward Callahan. "Gear him. Next trial will be under fire." John dressed in silence, pulling his underwear back on, every eye still fixed on him. He had not even unpacked, but already he had been measured, weighed, and found wanting, or promising. The next morning they brought him to a range shed. On the bench lay something between a football uniform and a bomb disposal rig. Thick canvas jacket, padded with leather, steel plates sewn into the shoulders and chest. Straps and buckles crisscrossed the whole thing, unfinished edges still raw. John frowned at it. "What's this supposed to do?" Captain Callahan smirked. "Supposed to keep you from turning into kindling if you catch another burst. Steel plate'll slow around. Canvas'll keep the shards out of your grain. Extra leather to disguise your unnatural shape a little. It's usually too heavy for most men in active combat. For you, it ought to be doable." Weiss grinned, hefting one of the plates. "And if it don't, at least you look scary doing it." "Exactly," Harlan said coldly. "Gear him." They buckled him in, mask strapped down, helmet on. The weight dragged at his shoulders. He tried to roll his arms. The canvas creaked. John shifted his shoulders. "Feels like wearing a mattress." "Obstacle course," Harlan ordered. The whistle shrilled. John lunged forward. The first wall nearly stopped him. He struggled to raise his arms and legs. The leather padding caught on the edge. He heaved himself over, ripping stitches with the strain. He rolled over the top and fell to the ground like a couch cushion. One leg bent embarrassingly forward. John forced it straight with a grunt. Down the rope climb, the padding made him lose range of motion, throwing off his rhythm. He powered through anyway, mud clinging to the canvas, bullets cracking overhead. At the balance beam he tried to sprint. The weight dragged him sideways. He crashed off, caught himself, rolled, and kept going, shards of leather and split straps trailing behind. By the time he crawled under the barbed wire, the jacket had torn at both shoulders. One steel plate dangled loose, flapping against his chest. He finished the run, streaked with mud, the suit hanging in tatters. Canvas shredded, plates scattered along the course behind him. Callahan barked a laugh. "Well, it lasted longer than I thought." Weiss shook his head. "We just built a coffin with armholes." Ellsworth was scribbling notes furiously. Impact slowed. Motion obstructed. Integrity collapsed after 2 obstacles. John stood at the end of the course. Face deadpan, he asked, "Permission to remove this? I feel like a tactical marshmallow." Harlan's lips tightened. "Granted." John shrugged out of the remains. Canvas tore. Plates clattered into the dirt. He stood in his undershirt again, shoulders squared. Hartman was the only one to speak softly. "You carried it anyway." Harlan gave a single nod. "Next design, stronger materials." By the 3rd day, they had moved on from the obstacle course and brought him into the mat room, a drafty warehouse lined with straw pads and canvas dummies. "Force alone is nothing," Colonel Harlan said, pacing at the edge. "A hammer is only useful if it strikes the right place. We'll teach you where to strike." Captain Callahan squared off against him, padded shield strapped to his forearm. "You're used to lifting, breaking, pushing. That won't do in close quarters. Watch me. Mirror my stance." John imitated as best he could. Broad shoulders bent, fists raised. His movements were stiff, his balance clumsy compared to the ranger's fluid step. "Better. Now throw a jab." John obeyed. The blow was heavy, but not fast. Callahan blocked with the pad and nodded. "Again. Faster. Don't push. Snap." They worked like that for a while. Jab, block, jab, block. John's wooden fists thudded against the padded shield. But after a dozen rounds, Callahan's jaw tightened. "You're holding back. That's not training. That's play acting. Again. But this time, mean it." John's brows furrowed. "It'll hurt." "Try me." Callahan braced himself, knuckles wide around the shield straps. John exhaled, then struck. A clean, straight punch. Callahan launched backward across the mat, landed hard and slid until his boots hit the wall. Silence. Weiss gave a low whistle. "Well, that answers that." Callahan groaned, rolling onto his side. He pulled the shield strap loose and waved it. "Forget what I said. Trying's fine. Perfectly fine." Even Harlan's stony face flickered, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. John stood still, fists still clenched, mouth pursed in mild amusement. Hartman's voice broke the silence, calm as ever. "Control is also strength, Captain Zimmerman. Remember that." John lowered his fist, shoulders relaxing. "Yes, sir." Training continued with grapples. Callahan circled behind him, locking John's arms across his chest, straining to pin him. "Learn to slip, not just shoving." John grunted, testing the grip. Callahan braced harder, forearm tight against John's throat. Even with his greater strength, Callahan was on him like a vice. The other rangers barked encouragement. "Pin him, Captain! Make the dummy tap!" For a moment, John stilled, brows lowered. Then, reluctantly, he said, "You asked for this." He twisted his head, not 90 degrees, but 180. His face spun around and waggled his brows up and down, staring into Callahan's shocked eyes. The captain recoiled. "What in—" In that instant of panic, John stepped forward and simply walked out of the hold, his body twisting in a way no human joints or spine should. Callahan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own boots. The room went dead quiet again. Then Weiss let out a bark of laughter. "Mercy! I'd surrender too if a fella's head spun at me like that." One of the rangers muttered, uneasy. "That ain't right." John straightened, waist rotating, elbows returning to the correct fold. Then he turned his head calmly back into place with a smirk. "It seems highly effective." Callahan shook his head, rubbing his arm, still rattled. "All right, that was good." Even Harlan's stern face flickered, eyes narrowing with something that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't dismissal either. Hartman only jotted a note. Range of motion. Beyond human limits. Potential tactical application. John worked his shoulders in circles. He didn't like showing it, but the lesson was clear. Sometimes the uncanny was as powerful as raw strength. Next they assembled at the cliff base. Ropes anchored to pittons hammered above. The stone face rose sheer, streaked with lichen and shadow. Callahan gestured. "Pair up. Standard ascent." Rangers nodded and began their climb, hands and boots moving with the steady rhythm of training. John took a rope in his hands, the coarse fibers against his smooth palms, and suddenly It wasn't this cliff, but the Dolomites. Snow howled against his cheeks. The rope was stiff and frozen. Men strained above him, breath steaming. Then a snap. The rope lurched, weight jerking down. John's fingers slipped, numb with cold. His comrade's scream tore into the fog as the figure plummeted, rope whipping free. John clawed for it, grabbed it. The rope sought his palms before sliding free. White emptiness swallowed the man whole. He blinked hard, blue eyes staring into memory. The roar of the snow faded back into wind roaring through the pines like the sound of a river. His chest tightened, hands locked on the rope. "Zimmerman! Zimmerman!" Harlan barked from behind. "Climb!" John's jaw set. He released the rope entirely. Instead, he pressed his wooden fingers into the stone, gouging holds where none should be. He climbed hand over hand, boots wedged against sheer face. Rock cracked beneath his grip, but he moved upward with mechanical certainty. Rangers froze mid-climb as he scuttled past. Weiss muttered, "Forget ropes. He's going up like some blasted insect." At the top, John hauled himself over the edge, joints rattling faintly, eyes clamped shut. Hartman and Weiss was waiting at the top. "You hesitated. Why?" John sat up, staring at the rope dangling over the edge. For a long moment he didn't answer. Finally, he said quietly, "White War. I was 19. Rope broke. I wasn't strong enough to hold it. Man fell. I still hear him." Silence held between them, the sound of rangers scrabbling from below. Weiss shifted uncomfortably. "That was another war, Captain. You're here now. You climbed. Every man's lost someone. You found a way. That counts." Hartman's voice carried gently. "Fear remembered is not weakness. Fear remembered and overcome. That is resilience." Harlan's call came from below. "Next exercise." John rose slowly, dusting stone from his palms. The scream still echoed in his mind, but he forced it down. He couldn't let the past stop him.